never came into my mind about genocide or war crimes up until I went to junior high and it all came to an end. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Akira, and in today's speech, titled Behind the Facade, we will dive deep into propaganda, its history, and how it affects our daily lives. What you've just heard is propaganda. But what exactly is the definition of propaganda? We have to define it here. Propaganda is the spreading of misinformation, half truths, arguments, or even lies with the common goal of influencing public opinion towards a certain political goal. Um, Based on the research I read titled Precis of How Propaganda Works by Jason Stanley, I quote this. I split propaganda into two varieties. The first, more familiar kind, which I call supporting propaganda, employs a valued political ideal to elicit emotion, devoid of reason, such as ungrounded fear or ungrounded pride, in the service of realizing that ideal. The second one, undermining propaganda, is an argument that employs an ideal in the service of a goal that tends to undermine that ideal. Undermining propaganda is demagoguery when there is a flawed ideology in place that distorts a valuable political ideal in such a way that prevents recognition of the fact that the goal undermines the realization of the valued ideal. I know, it sounds complex. So let me explain it in simple terms. There are two species of propaganda, and they deploy different tactics to with the same goal of influencing public opinion. One uses emotional manipulation to trick people into justifying a political view, and the other one makes a good value look like they support a goal that's actually against it itself. For example, during World War II, the Nazis exploited the economical crisis of the German people from the loss and sanctions from World War One, and they used that emotional crisis of the people to inject a racist ideology towards them, take over. Another example, Southerners in the US during secession and the Civil War appealed to the ideal of freedom to defend their succession. A flawed racist ideology was required to mask contradictions inherent in appealing to freedom to defend that social order based on the enslavement of many. They used that ideal, freedom, which everyone likes, and distorts it in a way that it supports defending that succession that's actually based on enslavement, which is against freedom itself. So, with the development of social media, people relying a lot on AI for information, and also the decrease in reading literacy, propaganda has been way more easier to deploy. An example is, for example, Israel using self-defense as a justification, spreading false information, such as at one time they said Hamas was beheading babies, which is true at all, and using anti-Semitism uh, to basically end every criticization of, and this is all propaganda used to mask their actual genocide of Palestinians. So now you all know that we can't just believe in the government's, because obviously it will be used towards the agenda. So who should we trust? We maybe trust the mass media, or maybe because they're publicly funded and publicly maintained. Well, not quite. It's been proven that even the mass media is not as transparent or as honest as we want to think. But they have long been a tool to manipulate public opinion as well. An example from an article I read is that in World War One, the need to secure public support for the war on all sides led to the development of modern war propaganda that borrowed techniques from the fields of marketing and public relations. And continuing into the Cold War, indirect and covert control of information became an increasingly important aspect of propaganda, and even the U.S. was tightly controlling the flow of information in US television news programs. And to close this, there was an examination in 1988 titled War Propaganda that questions the idea that the media as the fourth estate is responsible for being transparent and anti-government bias, uh, especially when they're not state-owned. However, they argued that media often reflects the interest of the economical and political elites. And although it is harder to see when the media is private or no formal censorship was available. So they made these five filters that show what influenced the media during the Cold War, get rid it of contrasting views. And by the way, this is also this can also be implemented in modern day propaganda as well. Number one is the size or concentrated ownership, the ownership wealth and the profit orientation. It matters because even if it's as little as an investor or like one of the member of the board, it can highly affect the information coming out of the media channel. Number two is advertising as the primary income source of mass media. Number three is the reliance of media on information provided by the government, business, and expert, funded and approved by these primary power. Number four is flack, which is what I found interesting, or basically negative responses, where where in a certain country, having a certain political view can can create negative responses or punishments from the government, which has become a means of disciplining the media to follow the government's agenda. And lastly, especially in the U.S., the Cold War, the U.S. used anti-communism as a national religion and control mechanism. And it is reasonable to argue now that Islamophobia has become of replacement. So now we know the media obviously isn't transparent, and even more so the government. So who should we believe in? I mean, after all, where else should we get our information? It's so I have this metaphor. It's like ships before engines were made. The wind was a great source of push to move forward, but to follow the wind blindly was to follow it to its own desire without having any specific end goal. So it is important to note that people in power can only control what they possess. What they do not possess, they cannot control. So, as mentioned before in the five filters, if the media is funded by someone in the government, it will have potential bias towards it. As an example, the BBC is not owned by the government, but according to London Museum organizing, okay, the ministers are involved in choosing the BBC, and they renew and the government renew and review their charter uh, regularly. So not that the BBC is 100% bad, but if you're seeing a conflict that's related to the K or off, you you will it will have potential bias, and you should consider. And it goes for my personal experience too. I finally read the history and see the testimony of people actually in the front lines. I unveiled the curtain to the truth of Israel's genocide on the Palestinian people. I didn't fall for propaganda anymore, and I now have my own political and moral stance. So I propose a solution for everyone. Don't fall for propaganda anymore, and you have your own clear moral stance. Ideally, when you want to find information on a conflict, you should read from sources that are neutral, that aren't affected by that five filters that I mentioned. But we all know it's not realistic. Everyone will have bias at some point. So it is important to read both sides of the story as well, to keep in mind every potential bias a media has, and to consider every author's history and background behind uh behind their media platform. And it's very important to be open-minded, to have critical thinking skills. So if, if you think that a news article doesn't make sense, you have to be able to challenge it, and you need to have your own strong moral stance, so you're not going to be easily swayed by different narratives in the media. I believe that in this era it is fully important to be able to recognize propaganda, because it's the first step to a democratically transparent society. Like Galileo once said, All truths are easy to understand once they are discovered. The point is to discover them. Thank you everyone for listening. It has been a nice session.